Hello, everyone. Welcome to MD Media's weekly show, the H panel. We have been absent for months until today, and we apologize for that. We are back with current state of affairs of Ethiopia. There is a lot to cover. That's why we selected this topic. And I'm joined by Faisal Robla and Taklai Gabramikal. Gentlemen, welcome, and we hope Itana Hapti will join us before the end of the show. So the topic itself is what stood out for you, but we will still follow the same segment, the three-part show. So the first one is the highlights of the week for each one of you. So Faisal, again, welcome. What stood out for you over the past
Uh,
days, weeks,
yes,
and so on?
thank you very much, Getachew, and welcome, Taklai. Yes, after a long absence, I'm very happy to join you. I think there are many things, but one issue that I like to focus is Ethiopia's disastrous diplomacy, both internationally as well as regionally. Internationally, I think because of the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that Ethiopia signed with Somaliland, it has really put Ethiopia in a very bad light. I just wrote an article which I shared with you a few days ago for the Eurasia op-ed piece, section, where I really argued that uh, the Turkish and Somali agreement that has taken place on February 23rd of this year is a milestone for Somalia and a game changer in terms of the regional power dynamics. That Somalia finally felt that the only way it can stop Ethiopia's aggression, and I'm using those words because the president of Somalia used that Ethiopia's aggression, quote unquote, to annex, unquote, Somali territories would only be stopped by having a good friend like Turkey, which signed a 10-year agreement with Somalia. And inter alia, I think the most important aspect of this agreement, defense agreement, which is called, is to defend Somalia in the event that any foreign power tries to take advantage of. And that defense agreement also includes a sort of training the Somali Navy, but in the event that it's needed to train to also help Somalia. And yesterday, President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud was in Turkey, where he again doubled down on the concept of Turkey being a friend out there. And I was really very interesting very happy to see how candid he was to understand Turkey's role, both bad and good. He said Turkey was there to save Ethiopia when the TDF forces were almost about to capture Addis Ababa, but now they are with us. And he was trying to say that Turkey stands for protecting existing states, what have you. So I think, in addition to Turkey's involvement in the Somalia situation, Prime Minister Abiy recently visited Kenya on an official visit to Nairobi, where he was invited to mend relationships. And many people are reading that visit to Nairobi in many ways, one of which is that maybe Abiy wants to now de-emphasize the MOU and the search for sea outlet to Somalia and look at Lamu. I think by March 5th, if I'm not mistaken, there would be a road travel between Ethiopian transportation and port authority and Kenyan counterparts. They will go to Mombasa, and then from Mombasa they will drive all the way to Lamu to show that. And this was really put together a month ago after Somalia challenged the MOU. We went this other direction, and the Lamu issue was resurfaced. So with that, I think two things I would just mention. Number one, on the Somaliland side, things are falling apart. Even the very committee that Musa Bihi put together to work with the Ethiopian counterpart, some of them are defecting, some of them are declining their membership, and one of the most prominent members is to help the Somaliland government to draft the final agreement. Mr. Mohammed Fadl finally said enough is enough. He doesn't think this is the right way. both for Somaliland as well as for Ethiopia. I think he was inclined to say that this is hurting Somaliland. Up to this day, Somaliland had an unofficial understanding of working with neighboring countries and with donors without declaring independence from Somalia per se, and not pressing the issue of secession. And I think with the introduction of Ethiopia into the mix, and Somali government saying Ethiopia is in the process of annexing not only the port and not only the naval base that we talk, but they are talking about the regions that are between the port and the border between Ethiopia and Somalia, a good 120 miles that separates the border from the from the port. So as we stand, Ethiopia is losing. The entire world came against Ethiopia. And with that, I think we don't know whether Prime Minister Abiy will roll back, but the only condition that Somalia put on the table in order to have diplomatic relationship and diplomatically resolve the issue is if Addis Ababa is walking back on its promise to work on the MOU. Other than that, Somalia sees this as an aggression.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Tahlai, welcome again. I know, as I always say when I bring you here, it's very late. Actually, it's the next day where you are. Thank you for doing that, and we need your contribution. So, again, for the first segment, what did you want to highlight in terms of what stood out for you?
Well, thank you, Getachew. I'm sort of a night owl, although it's changing with advancing age now. So it's fine. It's always a pleasure to join you, Getachew and Faisal. And if I could just add one point to the MAU thing, to what Faisal already said. Faisal wondered aloud whether Ethiopia was trying to roll back or not, and I heard from a very reliable source that that is what Abiy is being encouraged to do, to walk back. And the reason he hasn't publicly is because it's uncomfortable for him to do it in public. And the discussion that are being had between Abiy and his supporter, his Western backers, let's say, how the mechanics of how to roll back, but otherwise the understanding is that the agreement is unworkable and that it should be is something that is dead in the water. And uh, this is something that I actually got wrong, because I thought when they signed the agreement, Abiy had already secured the support of Western countries, but I was wrong, and it was just something that was hastily done, and it's proven to be a disaster for Ethiopia. So I thought I would just add one point in that respect. I think I'll just highlight two things, Getachew. One is a damning article on The Economist about the economic situation of Ethiopia. The Economist went they went past the facade that Ethiopia has been trying to put. I know the story that we are told on a daily basis is that Ethiopia is prevailing, that the Ethiopian economy is growing, Ethiopia is securing deals. That is the narrative that the Ethiopian regime has been pushing. But the article on The Economist, and based on the ground observation and interviews with officials and with people, essentially the point the Economist makes is that Ethiopia is toast as far as the economy is concerned. They go to Tigray, they see places there, and they paint the picture of devastation, which actually I would like to come back to later, if that's all right, because I had just returned from Tigray, so I have some first-hand account. And if I could just put some numbers, because it's, sometimes when the numbers are given, you just see the bleak picture. They say that defense spending has increased by 88% in 2022 alone. And they say that in the FDI, the foreign direct investment of 2022 and 2021 combined is less than that of 2019. So that is before the war. And they say that inflation is likely to increase by 20% in 2024. So this year. So these are the numbers that tell you how, in a sorry state of affairs, the economy of Ethiopia. So I just thought I would mention that because it's a very, very bleak picture. It's, of course, the article is written in typical British understatement, but if you read between the lines, they're really taking the piss about the economic picture of the country. The other point that I thought I would highlight is the alleged Adwa victory that Ethiopian regime had put a lot of time and effort into celebrating. And if you listen to the officials speaking at the celebrations, and if generally the general vibe that the regime has been trying to give, you would think that it was Abiy who won the Adwa battle. That is the picture that they are trying to create, to some sort of revisionism and some sort of attempt to retrofit history into the current time. You remember Getachew, I think it would have been 1 month ago, where they brought Menelik from the dead to give witness to the legitimacy of the current government, where he, what my understanding that Abiy wrote the script and he made it uh, sound as though that would be something that Abiy would say. But of course, I mean, Menelik would say. And Menelik was being very complimentary of the Abiy regime. Menelik was giving advice to the Ethiopian people to support Abiy. And the celebrations yesterday were the main message that they were trying to convey was that Abiy was trying to do the right thing, and he's the second incarnation of Menelik. That is the message being conveyed, and I find the whole shebang very, very hilarious. The attempt to try to portray Abiy as though he was the one who won the battle. Now, just one final point, if I may, Getachew, because like I said, I just returned from Tigray, and I mean, all of us have read a lot of stories about the devastation, about the atrocities, about the gang rape, about the destruction and the looting of properties in Tigray, and the general depredation of the war. I think all of us have a picture of what happened in Tigray. But when you go to Tigray, actually, the reality is much more bleak than you would get from reading reports, because it's a unique kind of war. You go to Mekelle, you land at Mekelle airport, and there is nothing to remind you of that there had been war in the way that, for instance, if you saw pictures from Gaza, for instance, you would immediately see what was happening, because the destruction is in your face, the ruins, the rubble, you could see that. But in Tigray, there is nothing physical that will remind you of that. You will have to look harder to see. There is nothing. There is no destroyed building. There is nothing. You'll have to go a little bit deeper, and you'll have to speak to people to actually comprehend what has happened. But as soon as you speak to people, that is when the magnitude starts to sink. You can't literally find even a single person who hasn't lost a close relative, and that is when the reality really starts to sink on. So I was to Mekelle, to Woro is a slight exception, because in Woro you could actually see the physical damage. There are shattered windows, broken windows, and damaged buildings. So you could see physical scars of the war. But in Mekelle there is nothing except you see worn down people. You don't see any construction site active. You don't see any the usual scene that people expect in Mekelle, a bustling city where people are doing a lot of things. You don't see that. It's quiet, it's desolate. People you could see in the face of people a sense of resignation and desperation. So if you look harder, of course, you could see that, but it's not in your face. If you go to Adwa, and which I did, to Aksum, to Shire, it's the same thing, where the physical signs of war don't exist. But as soon as you start speaking to people, you understand what the Eritreans and the Ethiopians had done. And I just want to make the point that it was a unique kind of war, because when you speak to people, the first thing they tell you, what they were careful in the way they prosecuted the war, especially the Eritreans. It was a silent war. They would go around, just kill people, loot property, especially office property, because part of the thinking was to turn Tigray into vacuum. So it was a very systematic. There was a very insidious method to the way they went about prosecuting the war. So I just thought I would make that point because some of you listeners might be interested in to hear what I observed in Tigray Getachew.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, Tarla, actually, as you know, and our audience should know that I'm waiting for the time where we can talk about that, about your visit, what you observed, and so on. So, both in English and Tigrinya. Thank you for that. So let's go to the topic. Like I said, the topic we chose is a general one because we haven't had H panel for a while. So current state of affairs of Ethiopia. You already started both of you in terms of the foreign, the domestic, and so on. So Faisal, if you were to summarize and if you were to rate where Ethiopia is, you have been using different and sometimes consistent way of expressing it. So how would you describe where Ethiopia is now, let's say domestically?
Yeah, very good. I think in a way, this station could say, we told you so, because everything that's now popping up to the surface is something we have been talking about for the last 2 years, really, particularly the economic crisis that Ethiopia is now facing, and The Economist covered. We covered that topic very, very exhaustively on this station. Just one quick thing, I think Taklai touched it very well. I will not go into the statistics, but with the British language being very well played with, the very fact that they used the Asian tiger as what Ethiopia was expected to be for students of development and economics, the Asian tigers were literally handpicked by the West to really create a different model of economic development that can prove to the third world countries that the Russian model doesn't work and the Western work. So this thing started in the 1960s, 70s, and by the 1980s, the Asian tiger economy, known in the literature as the newly industrialized countries, NICS, very much showed that prospect, positive prospect. I think there was something in the corridors of World Bank, IMF, and the US and the Western EU that during the EPRDF, Ethiopia was a promising example to follow that route. And for the economists to use that terminology now and say, we expected the Africa's tigers to be there, but now we are dismayed, is really saying a lot. And we need to be watching that. I think it looks like the West has given up from the economic point of view. Internally, we have been following several regions and several aspects of this. The first one is the Tigray issue. And I think Taklai probably told us half of the story when he says that, when you go deep into the community, you hear very difficult conversations being taking place. And that is what's going to be guiding the Tigray leaders. It's not going to be the loss of a building. It's not going to be the burning of a farm or the looted office. What's going to lead, and people will be expecting the interim administration of Tigray to respond to, is the deep, deep pains, the dark spots in their hearts that doesn't seem to be remedied by the federal government of Addis Ababa. How the interim administration of Tigray can really keep the people of Tigray alive. Something has died in them. I don't care how you put it. I don't care that Tigray was one time Ethiopia's central focus of creation of that empire or history. But what had happened in the last 3 years, something must have happened to the people of Tigray. It's not something that can be sugar-coated. There has to be some practical steps to be taken, both by the interim administration, by the world, and by the federal government, to really give people hope. Otherwise, a second phase of the war could easily be seen. And we already know that the Pretoria agreement has been trashed, and I will use that word without any advisory, because it's open that the federal government has trashed and walked back on the tenets of the Pretoria agreement, particularly rehabilitation and disarmament and reintegration of the it's almost over a year, and everything that we have seen from the federal government is pulling back, including not even being kind enough to let food, medicine and other things to go. So I think we haven't seen yet the impact. I always argue that this is not a 1 year, a 2 year healing. This is going to be a huge issue to be dealt with in the coming few years. We haven't even started the work of this, and the anger hasn't settled in. The pain, I think Taklai told us that the pain, the depth and darkness of what had happened hasn't sunk. Once that thing sinks, they will require, and the people of Tigray will require real answers, both from the local administration as well as from the federal government, and that will create a tension, and we have to see that. I think in terms of the Oromia region, I cannot underemphasize the recent report by the Reuters and others that the German-style Gestapo killings are taking place. There is no lower point that you can go in Oromia than the top echelon, if not Abiy, but his lieutenants, to carry at Gestapo-like killings of innocent people, political leaders, and elderly and traditional leaders. In the Amhara region, I think that war can no longer be minimized. The Fano war can no longer be trashed and put aside. It's a real war that's today hitting, not that far from Addis Ababa, Shawarobit, I think is that what it is. So there seem to be the civil wars and the collapse of the regime that we have been seeing is probably in the works. What I don't know and what I cannot put my finger is how different political stakeholders in the country are really coordinating and collaborating with this impending and exploding and imploding situation that Ethiopia has to face. Just finally, I tweeted yesterday. I like to really kind of quickly touch what President Sahle-Work said at Adwa yesterday. I think it was, yeah. And if it is true that she came on the invitation or by the invitation of the Tigray administration, with all the problems, with all her previous speeches, with all her infractions against the people of Tigray, I really tipped my hat off for her yesterday. Mistakes have been done, wrong have been done by all, including herself. But I think the very fact that she had the courage to stand and say, I was wrong. And I like the people of Tigray to know that we are here to ask for forgiveness and to move on and to work. It took hearts. Abiy doesn't have that heart. He cannot do what the president did. And I really congratulate her for doing that. And I hope the people of Tigray will open their arms and say, okay, that's good, but how can we collaborate? And we want to use her big microphone to see if she can even challenge the boss who is causing the war, particularly Prime Minister Abiy and Birhanu Chula. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. On her travel to Adwa, there are reports that show that she was told to go, I think, the same day. That's why the higher officials of Tigray, including the two vice presidents, they were already in Adwa, so there was nobody to welcome her in Maqala. So it looks like it was a last-minute arrangement from Arakilo. Taklai, thank you, Faisal, for that. Taklai, again, the same question. If you were, you emphasize the economic situation of Ethiopia, and thank you for sharing about the Tigray situation as well. So if you were to characterize where Ethiopia is now, How would you characterize that?
Well, I think I would generally describe the where Ethiopia is now as a state of delusion, and I'm going to use the example of the president. I know that Faisal is being very generous with her, and I understand. I think it's a good start that she. I wouldn't say she apologized or anything of that sort. She didn't do that, but at least she didn't say something that was outright ridiculous, which in and of itself I think is something to be grateful for about in the current circumstances in Ethiopia. But I think we should remind ourselves where she was standing in Adwa, and I was in Adwa 3 months ago. Um, and the biggest factor in Adwa, which was the biggest employer of a lot of people in the city, is completely gone. And the people who used to work there are now completely um, jobless. They have nothing. Most of them have left the city. There is nothing that you could describe as an economic activity in Adwa now. And the reason for that is because Eritrean troops deliberately destroyed every means of livelihood. And the president didn't mention that. The president said that brothers killed one another, but that is not what happened. That is not what happened. A foreign country deliberately came to Adwa and destroyed everything. That is not brothers killing one another. There was a method, there was a mission that Isaias wanted to achieve. He wanted to take Tigray back so that he could achieve equality by subtraction. That is a philosophy that they have, that Isaias has advanced for a long time. That is what happened. And any person, a president who is pretending to be a person of principle and upright, should mention that. At least that she should have implied that is what happened. And especially on a day when Ethiopia was celebrating a battle where Ethiopia resisted foreign aggression. That is the one point that the president should have mentioned, but she didn't mention that. She didn't mention the fact that people in Tigray are now starving because of the regime that she is serving. Um, you know, we published an article on Tigray today about the humanitarian situation in Tigray. It's so dire. People are dying of starvation, and the reason for that is because aid is not getting to Tigray, and that by design. It's not because there is shortage of supply. Humanitarian providers have not complained about that. They are complaining that they haven't been given the access. She didn't mention that. She didn't mention the destruction that was deliberately caused by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. So I think it was a good start, what she did, but there was an element of delusion in how she understood the whole problem. I don't know if it was deliberate or if it's that she doesn't understand what happened and how grave the situation now is in Tigray. And not just in Tigray. Faisal, you mentioned in Oromia, the clandestine Gestapo-like killing machine, you could say. Well, I mean, if you read the Reuters report, I think that the word that you have to use is it's a killer machine. They go around, arrest people, and kill people that they think might be a threat to the regime. And the Amhara, well, what can we say? We don't even know what's happening because there is no communication from the Amhara. So the country is a very, very dire straits, but there is not a single individual who is ready to stand up and speak about that. And the president could have been that person, given the supposed reputation that she has. Another point that I would mention, and this is also a point that Faisal briefly touched on, he said that something in Tigray, especially among the leaders, something is fundamentally wrong. And he's right. Faisal is right to say that. My sense, and again, from speaking to a lot of people in Tigray in positions of power, my sense is that they don't understand the magnitude of the problem. They don't understand the magnitude of what had happened. They are not behaving in a way that a politician in charge of people who had gone through what Tigray had gone through for the past 3 years. That is not how they are behaving. You wouldn't you wouldn't think that there was war in Tigray, but judging by how they go about, how they interact with the Ethiopian officials, and the fact that the utmost priority was a 6 days, 60 days meeting to figure out who the chairman should be. And actually, the chairman of the party wasn't a result of their discussion. It was a compromise that they had to reach because they couldn't agree. So ultimately, actually, the 60 days that they spent were completely useless. But the fact that that was of any priority in the face of people dying of starvation tells you that they don't understand what had happened in Tigray, what is happening in Tigray, and what might happen in Tigray if they don't do the right things. So there is a complete delusion throughout Ethiopia, and there's a complete delusion in Tigray as well.
Thank you, Tavlai, for that. Let's maybe, the points both of you touched in terms of the different regions and so on. So as we speak, actually yesterday and day before yesterday in Amhara region, the capital of Amhara region, Bahar Dar, according to reports from Fano, they entered the city and attacked a number of military centers, police centers, and so that's what we are hearing. This is, in normal years and days, would be a big news, and we are not seeing that happening, except for people who are interested in this and following this. So my point is, how is Abiy or the regime Arakilo successfully, quote unquote, covering this up, if you will, if that's the right word. Faisal, what is your reading of what's happening on the ground? Everywhere it's burning. This is actually from I don't know if you follow him, Steve Hanke. He's a professor and he follows a lot the economy of different countries. This is how he was describing the economy and the war this week, including the inflation, where he is measuring at 68%. He's measuring inflation of Ethiopia. He's a professor of economics, as I said, and he has been doing this, over the past few years. So 68%. So how is this, media machination or whatever we can use covering this all up, Faisal?
Yeah, no, I think Tekla used the right word to describe their state of mind, delusional. Few days before this article of The Economist came out and Steve Hanke's 68% inflation, and the last time we talked about this subject, Getachew, we were talking about 43% plus around that area, the inflation was. Now 68%. With that reality, few days ago, Abiy was talking to several regions leadership, Somalia, Afar, what have you, Benishangul, Hariri, and he said, to the surprise of, and these are his words, translated, to the surprise of the rest of the world, Ethiopia is a handful of countries that's doing a miracle in terms of its economic development. And he was saying that with such assurance and, feeling like 100% he's, so I think there is this delusion of completely staying in a bubble. And I think, I totally agree with Teklai in the sense that, and I will come back to Getachew with the President Sahala work. Absolutely, what she did is not enough, in my opinion. What she did is a beginning, and we have to watch her because, as I said in the last statement of my saying, the big microphone that she has could only be useful if she goes beyond that. And that was a simple beginning. But as I said earlier, the people of Tigray can no longer be satisfied with, small statements and a small work. They would need big thing. I think, the history of dictatorship will tell you that they never admit, autocrats, they never admit until the last hours comes and hits them in their doorsteps. Mengistu Haile Mariam, you recall, it was few hours, into the walking of the TPLF, EPRDF troops before he left. Ziad Barre literally left the town Mogadishu with the troops almost entered the city from the east. And you can go on and on, all the way from the days of Hitler to the days of, so this, this delusional bubble that they create, kind of numbs them, and they have the entourage of, ministers and, who are otherwise educated, intelligent people, but because they are conditioned not to tell them. So I think if you ask me today where Abiy is and, the condition in which they are, I think two things. Either he will put Ethiopia into an all-out civil war by doing what Ziad Barre did, in which case he will take some loyalist Oromo group from his own nationality or tribe, whatever, and fight till the last minute until he loses it, or he will take a hike with the insistence of some friends such as like Rutu and other people if things don't approve. And we don't see things improving if things don't improve. And we don't see anything improving at this point in time. I would expect in the coming few months the issue of Tigray to heat it up. It will not stay the way they are. I totally agree with Tigray. The very first doubt that came to the people of Tigray, in my opinion, after the Pretoria Agreement, was when the leadership of TPLF accepted Abiy to handpick their leader. That was it. Here was a nation that fought, lost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of youth, and went to Aret Kilo and accepted Abiy to say, I don't want a depression. With all, he could be bad, he could be good. It's not the personality, it's the dictation that he has given. And from that point on, there was a less status that Tigray leadership accepted, and they became similar to any other leader and regional president that Abiy handed. That was the first one. The second one, for 1 year, they haven't challenged the government, and they even bent their back when the former leader, officer of the election committee, Madexa, challenged. Everybody knows, and I think we argued here, Getachew, that in the system of law, the Pretoria Agreement trumped everything that was passed before that, because the government negotiated with the group TDF, TPLF, to suspend all hostilities and come into a new chapter. All that was needed was for Abiy to take that to the parliament, which he did, and take them out of the terrorist list. Everything else should have been fixed administratively. They didn't even speak to that. As you recall, they just pushed a little bit, talked about money and stuff like that, and it took almost another year for them to get that. So I think there is lax in the Tigrayan administration to challenge Abiy. That's one thing. I think the other issue is that we cannot know is the Ola war has ebbs up and down. And I cannot put my finger why that happens, but with the resources that they have, the geographic, richness in which they have, the forest and all that, their war seems to be inconsistent, as opposed to the Amhara Fana group within a short period of time, less than a year. Shower Robit was what they were hitting this morning or yesterday late. And that's not that far from Addis Ababa. It could be hit and run, but that's really shaking the grounds of Addis Ababa. And that's really making Abiy and his team unsettled. If you ask me today how Aret Kilo is feeling, the only thing that it has in store is fear. Fear, insecurity, and so very soon, hopefully, we may see people defecting. We may see people showing some kind of signs that they are no longer safe in Addis Ababa, and hopefully, that may be not in the distant day.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. Tahla, the same question, like why and how is he doing it? There were reports in the middle of the war in Tigray. The United Arab Emirates provided with all technical and even human resources in terms of messaging and the media, all that. So what is your take of, or am I wrong in assessing it that way? Like he has successfully um, covering, all this, what's happening from Bahardar to Walega, the crisis we have in Western Tigray and Europe, all that. Tahla.
I think there was there was an interesting article about well, partly about Abiy Ahmed, partly about how the Ethiopian state has been functioning generally on I think it was on foreign affairs, if I'm not mistaken. It was written by someone who was the communications director of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. I think he must have now left or maybe sacked. But it was authored by well co-authored by him and another person. I think it was on foreign affairs, if I'm not mistaken. And they make the point that what they quote a diplomat, a European diplomat based in Addis, as saying that Abiy is as an asshole, but he's our own asshole. So they know that Abiy he's not convincing them. At least if you are referring to Western diplomats and people in the international community, they know that Abiy is making a bad situation worse. So, in that sense, he's not convincing them by his genius. It's just that there is they have an incentive to support him, and we could go into those incentives. Partly, I think it's because of commitment fallacy, because they had supported him until now. So it would be awkward for them now to all of a sudden say, well, actually, we were wrong. So the system is, aligned in such a way that calling him out wouldn't quite work for them now, for the US, for the European Union, and all that. So there is that. He's not convincing them, but the incentives are such that they have to continue supporting him, hoping that somehow, someday, he will get out of the hole that he has dug for himself. In terms of in Ethiopia, again, an interesting line in the Economist article is what someone that the Economist interviewed. He's a Pentecostal evangelist in Addis Ababa, and the, he still believes that Abiy is doing the right thing, and to the extent that there are things not going his way, he will turn them around. So there are people who are committed to supporting Abiy, no matter what the reality is, and at any rate, they don't see it. Interestingly, the Economist makes reference to this restaurant in Addis. It's on the 47th floor of the Ethiopian Commercial Bank. It's a very glitzy, very luxurious restaurant where the well-to-do people in Addis go. And these people think that the whole country is like that. And they are the businessmen and the media people, the elite of Addis, who think that everywhere in Ethiopia is the same as the area that they frequent. So there is that support that Abiy has in the back, regardless of what the situation in the country is, they will support him. And the rest of the country, the people know that they are suffering, but they also know that they don't have the means to change. So it's not that the Abiy is convincing them; it's just that they don't have any political means to change the situation. So people are just suffering, relying now on completely humanitarian aid, at least as far as Tigray is concerned. Um, I haven't met a single individual who had any sort of belief in the government. There is a sense of resignation throughout Tigray. People are just resigned to accepting the state of affairs, and they're just hoping that some NGOs and all that would just continue providing supply. So the average person in Ethiopia, they are not convinced on Abiy. I think they know that Abiy is the wrong person, but there is nothing that they could do. And the international community is for the reason that I said.
Great, thank you. And let's go to the maybe if there were any linchpin, I mean, there are a lot of explosives everywhere, whether it's the economy, the social fabric, the war, all that. If you were to advise anyone who have this Superman way of solving issues, where would it be? I'm just wondering, avoiding, what will happen, what might come, and so on. Given the situation that you characterized, Faisal, for example, what would be the way to address all these complex, complicated issues we have, from peace to war to famine, everything else?
Yeah, I think Definitely, the problem emanates mainly from the prime minister. I mean, Ethiopia had many issues, but his lack of consistency and staying at task, like a child who has autism or some kind of attention deficiency. I'm hearing today that he has talked to Ruto to see if he can join the East African community. I mean, maybe 2 3 months ago it wasn't on the agenda. He just sees all these alliances. He's losing some of his key alliances in the region. So he's just freaking out. This is just a policy being made on the run, because Ethiopia could have even led the East Africa Commission many years ago if it wanted and if it did the analysis. So maybe I I think it's in terms of the international and the Western. One thing I'm very much privy of is that, as Taklai said, they 100% know that he's the devil that they have to live with at this point in time. They don't know where to go from here. On the one hand, since 2019, experts in the United States foreign policy community have been predicting, or at least afraid, of a potential disintegration of Ethiopia. Whether you call it, Carson, who was Undersecretary for Africa during Bush, Shane, Brasilia, all of them came in 2019 and they warned with the intelligence that they had. And there are a lot of intelligence issues that we are not even aware of, that they are through their espionage. And these guys have access to that information. As far back as 2019, 2020, they raised the issue of a potential disintegration. At that time, there was no even war. But the way the guy changed it from 2018 to 2019, there were signs to show that. 4 years, 5 years after that, absolutely there is nothing that holds Ethiopia together except that the people haven't started and picked up the gun and snatched the regions to the extent that they would like. There is the Benishangul problem. There is the, Gambela issue. There is the Tigray issue, which has yet to be healed. There is the Amhara issue, the Oromo, and the Somalis are laying low. We don't know what would happen in that region, but they are laying low. We see the calm before the storm. What you see in Somali region is not really 100% stability. Even at the top echelon of the leadership, they have misgiving and they will tell you how much they are worried about the current affairs of the country. So I think the West doesn't have anyone in the Ethiopian body politic at this point in time to lean on and say this is the agent of change. I think if they see, and this is my own estimate after I talk to several people, if they see a coalition of opposition groups with moderate agenda coming together, it's my thesis that they would look for venues to see change to come. Other than that, we will be forced, and the West will say we have no other alternative except to go ahead with the distorted transitional justice that the government of Prime Minister Abiy is spearheading, and the so-called national dialogue, which they know, and their offices already spoke about how that is not a comprehensive, inclusive one. But they say they will tell you there is nothing we can do at this point in time except to work with what we have. So I think that's the message that they are sending to groups that they meet, whether it's in Addis Ababa, somewhere else in the diaspora, that there is nothing to lean. You cannot support unilaterally TPLF, TDF. You cannot unilaterally support OLA if you are the United States of America, or FANO. But if they see a national across the board coalition with a moderate idea, and of course to hold the country together, because the West sees Ethiopia no longer as an anchor, really that died. the concept of Ethiopia being an anchor to the, because at this point in time, Ethiopia is the destabilizer of the Horn of Africa. But I think some see it as an economic potential giant and a big market, and that idea is sold, and he touched it, Taklai touched, that idea is sold to the rest of the West by United Arab Emirates, that sees that 20 years from now, oil will not be what it is today, but they can be middlemen and women to sell products to Africa, particularly Ethiopia and Sudan with their massive population. That's the only thing that's holding to. But I guarantee you, and I propose to our audience, that the moment they see a coalition of different groups coming together and having an agenda, we will see a lot of people tacitly or not tacitly supporting that movement to see change in Ethiopia, because the current situation is not sustainable. The West leadership is pressured by lobbyists, by diaspora groups, by human rights groups, by NGOs. If you go to Washington and go around with those stakeholders who always lobby for Africa, fed up about Ethiopia, fed about the current status, they want to see some change.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Taglai, same question. If you were to have an advisor's hat, what would be your take on that?
What, advisor to Abiy Ahmed or advisor to the members of the international community?
More of the international community.
Yeah, I think Faisal has put everything well. I don't think I could I would improve on it. But I just, one point I think we forget. It's always good to start with what has happened in Western Tigray. The Amharas and the Eritreans together went to Western Tigray, ethnically cleansed everybody, and continue to occupy it. Now, what is the message that sends to Ethiopians everywhere? The message simply is that if you have the force, you could do whatever you want to do. I'm not focusing on the crimes committed, the accountability, and the people in IDP centers. Let's put that to one side for another time. Let's just focus on the message that sent, the message that the fact that the Ethiopian government hasn't not just not condemned, but also supported them actually to the Amhara forces and the Eritrean forces occupying Western Tigray is with the tacit support of the Ethiopian government. And the message that sends to various groups in Ethiopia, whether armed or unarmed or political parties or any group, the message is that if you have power, you could do whatever you want. And as long as that message is on, as long as that message is active, as long as that message is not repudiated actually by the government, of course, everybody is going to want to organize and to be armed so that they could, annex land and they could defend themselves, because that is the message. And if there is anybody in the international community who wants us to help solve the Ethiopian problem in a fundamental way, they should focus on changing that message, on making the point that you can't use force to advance your political interests. I think that is a very, very important point. And the Pretoria Agreement is a good framework for changing that message. Now, a good point that Faisal made, one of the very fundamental mistake that the Tigray leaders now made was in accepting the demolition of the local council of Tigray. That shouldn't have happened, because what happened now is the legitimacy of the transitional government comes from Abiy Ahmed and not from the Tigray people. And that was in contravention to the Pretoria Agreement. All the Pretoria Agreement said was that the TPLF and the federal government together form a transitional government. And by definition, that transitional government should have been accountable to the Tigray people. But that was not done. And I have no idea why the Tigray leaders allowed that to happen. It was utter naivete that happened. And it's a good point that Faisal made. And now, because a lot of people in the Tigray government don't agree with that, some people are unhappy, people like Debrecen, there is a divide, there is split in the Tigray government, and not government, but in the TPLF, there is a split down the middle. People who believe that was a mistake and that there should be an election to remedy that mistake, and people in the Tigray transitional government who believe that it's fine to continue working with Abiy, and that has created a sense of friction and mutual suspicion. And as long as that is the case, the Tigray government is going to be what is the word? It's a blunt instrument. They're not going to change anything as long as that divide, that mutual suspicion exists. And the international community should understand that problem, go to Tigray and help them bridge that divide and create an entity integrated that has a degree of legitimacy, that has some sort of power to negotiate on behalf of Tigray and implement the Pretoria Agreement in good faith. I think that would provide a good foundation for solving problems, whether that is in Somalia or in there. I mean, if you go into the basic question of what the fund are asking, it is about how to resolve, for instance, contested areas. And if you put a framework in the in Western Tigray and in Southern Tigray, you will have done a great service in terms of telling other armed groups how problems are going to be solved. So that would be my advice. Help implement the Pretoria Agreement in good faith and work your way up from that.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are done with the show. If there is anything that you want to say as a parting thought, I can give you a minute or two. Faisal, you want to share anything?
Yeah, no, I think Taka raised a very good issue in terms of what's causing the problem, which is land grabbing, both internally as well as externally. Externally, as you know, Abiy lost as a government leader so much support from the West and from EU and AU, IGAD, because he wanted to grab land from Somalia. As a matter of fact, previous government never did this. During the EPRDF, Somalia was literally weaker than what it is, 10 times weaker. There was no really government. Ethiopia could have taken advantage at that time. And there was a situation when the former president of the first president of Somaliland and former prime minister of Somalia, Mohamed Habiburahin Egal, came to Addis and literally proposed to Mala Zenawi that Somaliland would like to unite with Ethiopia. Timajid Hussein was there, everybody was there. And Mallas responded with his team to say that that's a good idea, but we will wait till Somalia sorts its problems out and then coming to us, then we can talk about it. That was really, if Ethiopia wanted to take advantage of a weak neighbor, that was the time, not now. Now Somalia stood up. United Nations is a resolution that banned weapons to be sold to Somalia that is lifted. More than Ethiopia, Somalia has worked on its debt relief, and it has been, really cleared its debt. It has established such a good rapport, at least with the rest of the world, in terms of being a partner and what have you. And, after all that work with the West, Abiy comes on the land grab. As a matter of fact, in my estimate, Abiy has undermined everything. And when I say this, I'm not like in the West's policy towards Africa, but US spent so much effort to stabilize the Horn of Africa, all the way from the Mengistu days up to this day. And if there is one person who is undoing what the West has done in the Horn of Africa to stabilize and encourage cooperation and collaboration, it's none other than Abiy Ahmed. And he is not only undermining Ethiopians, he's also undermining the West's effort. Having said that, I totally agree with Teklai. The other hidden agenda that we'll be dealing with, that Walqait issue exemplifies, is that there is such a land grab all over in Ethiopia that if you really don't handle the Walqait issue, it could really boomerang throughout the country. Somali Afar, Somali Oromo, Oromo Gambela, Benishangul, all those areas, Benishangul and Amhara. So I think, although there are people that are hurting, and Abiy said that when he was talking to the Somalis and the Afar and everybody, he said, we cannot just arbitrarily change the boundaries because we have to be meticulous. Well, if you don't want to change, and you're right, Somalis don't accept the post 2004 boundaries, but they cannot change it. They have to go by what the existing federal rules say. He should apply that to all over until another comprehensive program comes into play. But he cannot just pick up one region and say, I'm changing the boundaries. And I think that land grab issue is the bomb that he's sitting on it, and it could explode on his face anytime soon.
Great, thank you, Faisal. Tarla, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, just one minor point. The basic assumption on the part of the international community in 2018, when Abiy came to power, the basic assumption was that this was a reformer. This was someone who would liberalize the economy, and therefore that this is someone that we should support. That was their thinking. Now, they didn't have reason to believe that if they had paid attention to the sort of person that Abiy was. It was obvious to anybody who paid, even 5 seconds time of attention, that he was a fraud. But anyway, that was their assumption. But it has long he has long shown to be completely the opposite. Abiy is not a reformer, and the market hasn't been liberalized. And actually, in the Economist article, they make the point that factors are now closing left and right. So none of the things that they had thought would be the case has materialized. So if there was a time to change course on the part of the international community, actually it's past time now. So that would be my advice to them. The basic assumption, the basic premise, the basic proposition in 2018 has changed. The reality is now very clear. They could see that Ethiopia is getting worse and worse as a country, as an economy, as a political system, and they have a lot of leverage. They could change the course of events, and they should intervene. I think that the thing that is getting in the way for them, from where I'm sitting, is because it is painful to change course, to admit, to concede that you were wrong. But I think it's about time that they made that basic admission. I think if they were to do that, a lot of positive things would come from that.
Great, thank you, Taklai, thank you, Faisal, and I just want to share our viewers that Itana Hapte was supposed to be here today, and hope he's doing well. And we invited as well Yirga to talk about what happened in Amhara region, and he couldn't make it today. Good night, Taklai. Good morning, and Faisal. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So we'll see you next week with yet another edition of the H panel. And before you leave, share, like, subscribe, so that YouTube can also disseminate what we have done today to many viewers. Your host was Getachew Asafa. Good night from here. Bye.